of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms. The right to vote is not to be denied on account of race or color. The right to vote shall not be denied on account of sex. The right to vote shall not be denied by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. The right to vote is not to be denied of citizens who are 18 years of age or older.
Civil rights.
Black lives matter. Pride. Women's suffrage.
Speaking for those who are being silenced.
Me Too movement.
Immigration.
Religious freedom.
Be the change you want to see.
March.
Speak out.
Stand up and vote.
Make your voice heard.
Be an activist any way you can. I have the right as a man to feel emotion.
I have the right to actively take pride in myself.
I have the right to change my mind.
I have the right to not live my life in fear.
I have the right to decide what happens to my own body.
I have the right to follow whatever religion I want.
I have the right to speak out.
I have the right to live without the permission of men. I have the right to say no.
I have the right to live without shame.
I have the right to feel enraged and empowered.
I have the right to my own opinion, despite where I come from.
I have the right to live my own damn life.
I have the right to create chaos for my fight.
I stand before you tonight under indictment for the alleged crime.
The presence of Alabama National Guardsmen was required on the University of Alabama to carry out...
Martin Luther King Jr. said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility in the status quo than about justice and humanity. Alicia Garza, founder of Black Lives Matter, asked, "How do we stop violence, looting, and riots?" The way that we stop that is by making sure that people have the things that they need to thrive.
Riots are started to show what America has overlooked. Riots have occurred in America since our country's beginning. Throughout our history, Americans have been battling discrimination, oppression, and inequality.
Violence is not a preferred act by protesters, but rather a consequence of being ignored, criticized, and oppressed after numerous attempts to be seen and heard.
Riots indirectly produce social change by focusing attention on an issue and the collective frustration and resentment.
The difference between African and American slavery is that in America, chattel slavery was practiced, people as property. America enslaved people who look different than them. Both the Bible and the Quran indicate enslaved people should be treated as human and eventually released. Minorities have continued to be the victims of profiling, abuse, and violence.
The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882 and banned citizenship to people of Asian descent. It wasn't fully repealed until 1943. Federal policy barred Asian immigrants from becoming citizens and voting until 1952. Women, African Americans, Indigenous people, and Asian Americans were systematically denied the right to vote for centuries.
The 19th Amendment to the Constitution, extending the vote to women, was adopted in 1920. State of Tennessee's legislative vote on August 18, 1920, meant the amendment had been ratified by 3/4 of the states, and therefore became law, marking women's 50-year push to secure the right of women to vote. The Tennessee's vote came down to one vote. A legislator's mother wrote to her son, "Hurrah, and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I noticed some of the speeches against. They were bitter. I have been watching to see how you stood, but haven't noticed anything yet. She ended with, "Be a good boy and help. Put the rat in ratification." Her good son then voted yes.
On December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks rejected the bus driver's order to vacate a row of 4 seats in favor of a white passenger. She was arrested and tried for disorderly conduct and violating a local ordinance. The Montgomery bus boycott began on the following Monday and lasted over 380 days.
In September 1957, President Eisenhower sent federal troops to Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, to enforce 1954 Supreme Court ruling on public school desegregation. Among the African American students, soon to be known as Little Rock 9, was Elizabeth Eckford. She recounted her efforts that morning. "I walked up to the guard who had let the white students in. When I tried to squeeze past him, he raised his bayonet, and the other guards closed in, and they raised their bayonets. They glared at me with a mean look, and I was very frightened, and I didn't know what to do. I turned around and the crowd came toward me. I tried to see a friendly face somewhere in the crowd, someone who would maybe help. When I looked in the face of an old woman, it seemed a kind face. But when I looked at her again, she spat on me."
On March 7th, 1965, civil rights demonstrators in Alabama were peaceful participants in a Selma to Montgomery march for voting rights. Met by Alabama state troopers, the demonstrators were attacked with nightsticks, tear gas, and whips after they refused to turn back. The incident was captured on national television. Some were severely beaten and bloodied. Some ran for their lives. In the wake of the shocking incident, then President Johnson called for a comprehensive Voting Rights Act, which was passed into a law prohibiting racial discrimination in voting and similar devices that were historically used to disenfranchise racial minorities. Georgia Congressman John Lewis was part of the 1965 Bloody Sunday and had been beaten by police, returned to the site in 2020, and continued to promote nonviolent protest, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. The turbulence and civil unrest of the 1960s fueled the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, and Malcolm X. In 1968, at the Democratic Convention, there were protests and riots by Vietnam dissenters resulting in police brutality. Reports on the war were seen every evening on the nightly news. In 1969, police raids at the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in New York City, and the resulting community riots initiated the Gay Pride movement.
In 1995, the Million Man March to Washington was organized to unite black males in self-help and self-defense against the American society's negative depiction of the black male.
In 2017, the Women's March on Washington was focused on sending a message to new administration about women's rights, health care, and reproductive rights.
Parkland, Florida, February 14th, 2018. Imagine the person you love the most. Imagine the person that you hold closest to you, that is your shoulder to cry on, the person you laugh the most with and cry with. And imagine that person is murdered. And you go to politicians and ask for moderate changes, they won't even meet with you. Or if you do ask them for changes, they'll say, "Yeah, we'll do that." And then nothing happens. And you have to continue to see more and more people, just like your best friend, your sister, or your brother, get killed again and again. David Hogg, Parkland survivor, recounting the tragic events. Never again.
October 27th, 2018. A mass shooting occurred at the Tree of Life Synagogue, or La Simcha congregation, in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in which a white nationalist shot and killed 11 members of the congregation. The massacre was at least the fourth mass shooting in a house of worship in many years. In November 2017, a gunman killed 26 worshipers at a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. And in 2015, a white supremacist killed 9 congregants during services at an AME church in Charleston, South Carolina. In April 2014, a mass shooting at a Jewish community center and a Jewish assisted living facility in Overland Park, Kansas, in which a neo-Nazi shot and killed 3 civilians, including a 14-year-old teenager. All of these horrific events were stated in part of a Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act introduced in 2019 in the U.S. Senate, but the bill never received a vote.
May 25th, 2020. George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, Minnesota incites worldwide protests. We cannot look at this as an isolated incident. The reason why buildings are burning are not just for our brother George Floyd, it's because people here in Minnesota and all across this nation are saying enough is enough. We are not responsible for the mental illness that has been inflicted upon our people by the American government, institutions, and those people in power. I don't give a damn if they burn down Target, because Target should be out in the streets standing with us. If you are not coming to the people's defense, then don't challenge us when young people who are frustrated by the paid instigators begin to cause more of this uproar. They are enraged, and there's an easy way to stop it. Arrest them. Charge them. And get the justice that is deserved. Bottom line, do your job and do what you say this country is, the land of the free. Don't talk to us about looting. It was a learned trait that was inherited from how this country was founded. If you want us to do better, then damn it, you do better. I can't breathe shouldn't just be a hashtag. Tamika D. Mallory, social justice leader, advocate, and activist. Say their names: George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Samuel DuBose, Sandra Bland, Walter Scott, and Terrence Crutcher.
January 6, 2021. He called us to the Capitol and wants us to make it wild. Sir, yes sir. Gentlemen, head to DC and pack your shit. There's gonna be a war. Every lawmaker who breaks their own stupid law will be dragged out of their office and hung. We need to retreat and attack another point. No, hold the line. Storm, we will not be denied.
February 2021. New Hampshire lawmakers are debating a bill that would prevent educators from teaching about systemic racism and sexism in public schools and state-funded programs. HB 544, titled an act relative to the propagation of divisive topics, seeks to limit public schools, organizations, and state contractors from discussing topics related to racism and sexism, and would specifically ban teaching that the state of New Hampshire or the U.S. is racist or sexist. Lawmakers discussed the bill at a hearing of the Executive Department's and Administrative Committee that began February 11th.
March 18th, 2021. 8 killed at 3 massage spas in Atlanta. 6 were Asian, 7 were women. And if you are tired from the mass shootings, the double standards, the he was having a bad day, the thoughts and prayers, the pain, you are not alone. They were our sisters, and they were killed by a white man in a time when anti-Asian hate incidents are terrifyingly high. A crime of hate, misogyny, and race. The Revolutionary Love Project, Valerie Carr.
March 22nd, 2021. 10 people, including a Boulder, Colorado police officer, was shot and killed at the King Soopers supermarket.
March 25th, 2021. Georgia's Election Integrity Act was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor, placing new limits on mail voting and access to ballot drop boxes. It added new identification requirements for absentee voting, limited the use of drop boxes, granted more authority over elections to the legislature,
and incorporated misdemeanor charges for groups to offer food and water to people waiting in near polling places.
March 30, 2021 was the annual International Transgender Day of Visibility, a day that's usually dedicated to trans joy and celebration. But this year, more political attacks on transgender youth have occurred. Over 28 states have introduced anti-trans legislation. These bills aim to immediately strip trans youth of health care and ban them from participating in interscholastic and intercollegiate sports. Several of these bills have already passed. New Hampshire introduced HB 198 in March 2021, which would prevent transgender girls from competing on women's sports teams in public high schools and colleges in the state. April 2nd, 2021. Immigrants with small children crossing the Mexican-U.S. border were apprehended by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. The immigrants were then flown 600 miles to El Paso and escorted back across the international bridge into Mexico. The head of U.S. Homeland Security said, "The border is not open. What we have discontinued is the cruelty of the previous administration." Reports of overcrowding at the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention sites, food shortages, and lack of appropriate hygiene facilities are commonplace. Then holding areas of unaccompanied children are reported as deplorable, and some children have died or become severely ill. Migrants are routinely subject to rape, assault, and other crimes. An unauthorized immigrant who ultimately succeeds in reaching our territory are consigned to live and work in the shadows without the full protection of our laws.
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Martin Luther King Jr.
1776 and before, white, Christian, and 21 years old to have the right to vote, have to be Protestant, and own property. 1856, the right to vote was extended to all white men. 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed to grant citizenship. 1870, the 15th Amendment telling us we could not deny anyone the right to vote, although this did not apply to women. Why should I vote? When you have someone in office and you continuously see them do things that will make lives better or worse, you have to vote for them to stay or be bounced. When someone you don't agree with stays in office, there's so much damage they are going to do, and you know they will because they've already started. My first time voting was a weird and hectic one. I especially made sure I voted this year because who was in office, I cannot stand to have another 4 years of misery and potentially worse oppression. I ran around the day before the election getting registered and situated, then went to the elementary school and voted. Ibram X. Kendi wrote in How to Be an Anti-Racist, "It is becoming harder of people of color to vote out of office the politicians crafting these policies designed to shorten their lives. Racist voting policy has evolved from disenfranchising by Jim Crow voting laws to disenfranchising by mass incarceration and voter ID laws. Wisconsin's strict voter ID law suppressed approximately 200,000 votes, again, primarily targeting voters of color. Proposals to change voting laws in New Hampshire include eliminating Election Day voter registration and would prohibit students from using their educational institution as a place of legal residence. New Hampshire has the highest number of students per general population, about 11% of the state's population.
Those who rage against and work against expanding the electorate know what's at stake. The goal is to block access to the ballot and to policymaking because letting the agitators inside might yield new laws to remedy inequality or injustice. The fear of these elected officials is a loss of power, grounded in an assortment of causes like racism, sexism, homophobia, religious intolerance, or an inchoate desire to keep the world as it was when they sat at the peak of influence. They forgot that the bygone days of political tranquility never truly existed. The agitators simply hadn't amassed sufficient power to be heard, but they are getting closer to it every day. Stacey Abrams, our time is now, power, purpose, and the fight for a fair America.
In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in the Lincoln Memorial at Washington, D.C. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the
federal government about our basic right. Give us the ballot, and we will quietly and nonviolently, without rancor or bitterness, implement the Supreme Court's decision of May 17, 1954.
When the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional.
Prior to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voter suppression measures that were placed on the African American community included violence, intimidation, beatings, and killings. Literacy test. The poor and the disenfranchised could not read. Property test. Requirements to own property prior to ability to vote. Purging of the voting rolls. Periodically removing names from the registered voter rolls. Poll taxes. Requiring a fee to vote. This past year's election was such a big year, and I was finally old enough to vote. And when I filled in the bubble, I made my decision as dark as possible. I wasn't taking any chances.
It's not only our right, but our responsibility to vote as citizens. If I want my voice to be heard, I must vote for what I feel is right. It is important for me as a young woman to vote because women before me fought for decades in order for me to vote today. With that, I want to ensure that I'm using my voice while I have the right for others in the past that weren't able to vote. The fight for my rights has not gone unnoticed or underappreciated. I want to vote in honor of the women who fought tirelessly for me to have a voice, as well as for groups that are underrepresented. In addition to this, I want to set a good example to future generations.
Everything is a habit of mind. Everything is a state of mind. Everything is about your mind. There's really something screwed up about how people think. Not everyone fits into a particular category. The concept of we is overused and so generalized, it doesn't really work when talking about specific groups of people. There are people on this planet who are genuinely good people. But even those people can have some hate in their bodies when it comes to beliefs. There's always going to be an argument for whatever topic or idea is being talked about. And with every good argument, there's also going to have to be a counter-argument. The thing is, if you play devil's advocate and speak as those terms of talking about a counter-argument, people will think you're wrong and see that opinion as involved and not evidential proof of anything. If you speak about the argument to the people who agree with you, you are never going to spark a change. If you talk about making a change to the people who do agree with you, then the amount of outreach and change that is going to happen will not be significant and won't help anybody's cause.
96 people die every day from guns in our country, and yet most representatives have no public stance on guns. And to that we say no more. We are going to make this the voting issue. We are going to take this to every election, to every state, in every city. We are going to make sure that the best people for our elections run, not as politicians, but as Americans, because this is not cutting it. When people try to suppress your vote, and there are people who stand against you because you're too young, we say no more. Students at the march in 2018, March for Our Lives. In March 2021, the U.S. House of Representatives approved a pair of gun control bills, expanding background checks and gun sale licensing.
March 24th, 2021, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP's President Derek Johnson said this: "We cannot return to normal. Normal in America means endless mass shootings in churches, schools, and even grocery stores. Normal in America means crushing trauma for families and communities across the nation. Normal in America means that only 83 days into 2021, 102 mass shootings have already occurred at the hands of gunmen. We can no longer wait another minute to act on the gun violence epidemic. That is why the NAACP is calling on Congress to immediately ban assault weapons. Preventable deaths have been the tragic result of paralyzed progress."
Question: who owns your body? Yourself, and only yourself. Others may have influence on how it was created. Your mother and father for your born features, your friends, family, and teachers for what you have been taught or initially believe. But this life is your own. You live it to serve no other. So who is to own your own body, existence, mind, and thoughts other than the one it is to serve? Yourself.
Georgia Stacey Abrams said, "We must use our words to uplift and include. We can use our words to fight back against oppression and hate, but we must also channel our words into action." If I have to talk to a police officer, I don't fear for my life. When I wear a mask, I don't worry that people will think I'm a thief. I don't worry about what people will think of me based on the color of my skin. And it breaks my heart that other people do. If a white person had to live with dark skin for a day, I think their perspective would change. I hope that the ridiculousness will stop. Enough with petty arguments between parties. Enough with lies and deceit. Enough with hating and discriminating against people for being human. When does the other side stop talking and listen? Maybe we just have to be persistent. Maybe we have to yell louder. Do my words matter? Words carry voices and power. If our voices don't matter, our lives don't matter. Sometimes our voices are all we have.
I learned that only 93% of New Hampshire is white, when I thought it was way, way more. I always think about how I don't go anywhere alone outside of campus in fear of being followed or something worse happening to me. I always think about how my grandfather came with me on my first day of preschool and picked me up to make sure I made friends and was treated the same as all the other kids, which I was. I think about the time my brother was walking to the dollar store midday and a cop came up to him asking what he was doing and then asked for his ID, and he was 15 and didn't have one. I always think about how transparent I am when I go shopping, having my receipt in hand and my bag open to prove that I'm not stealing. I grew up in New England, and being around people who mostly don't look like me took a toll on how I look in the mirror.
Due to a controversial voting law passed by state officials in Georgia, in April of 2021, Major League Baseball announced a venue change for their All-Star game as they pulled the game from Atlanta and moved it to Denver. The New Hampshire House voted for a fiscal budget in April 2021 and included a provision which would bar tax money going to schools which teach that race or sex make people inherently oppressive or victimized. Representative Jean Judy of Manchester said, "Anyone in this room who lived one day in my life would understand why educating people about racism is vital."
Who am I? And does my voice matter? Yes, my voice matters. But do we ever get a chance to tell our story? I know I haven't, because when I'm given the chance, I shy away. But not anymore, though. This is my story. Stories should be listened to, and common ideals are key to success. And instead of worrying about, is my story worth telling? We should be worried about what's next in my story.
Just because we are performing with papers in hands and eyes on our text does not mean you, the audience, can relax from our changed focus. Our adjusted eye contact should not be a relief from discomforts from the reality that may seem more real when we look you in the eyes to tell them. What I do with my life, what I believe in, who I see and love, matters nothing to you. If I'm going to hell for accepting my closest friends and family, then I'm going to hell, not you. I understand you are trying to save others with your beliefs, that you're trying to guide the best to me so that I may be saved. But consider me a lost cause, my friend. There are difficulties in morals and values, gray areas, blurred lines. With those ideas, worry about yourself, or be considerate of the intentions of others. There are stories with depths you do not understand. Be curious of what inspires others to believe the things they do. Accept the things you can't control. Even as our generation becomes more educated in the realities of racism, just as many remain blind to its injustice. But those blind people will always exist because they will never change. They refuse to. The best we can do is get the right people in audience in power. Put people with strong persuasion in the right places to get as many people to listen.
Multiple perspectives are a wonderful thing. Sometimes it's hard to wonder if discussing topics with people who think all the same will even make a difference. You should be knowledgeable in all ideas and topics, but at the same point, you are just preaching to the choir. There should not be a reason. There should not be a reason why every child doesn't deserve an education.
Growing up, I lived in somewhat of a broken household, with a father who struggled mentally, and a brother who struggled as well. And then me, a basket case of mental issues and hospital visits. Some days were rough and felt endless, and I didn't go to anyone because I didn't want to hinder them. That all changed drastically when I became homeless. So, what is it actually like to become homeless? Mentally, it's devastating. Every memory tied to that house, apartment, or trailer, gone but never to be entered again. That's exactly what it feels like a piece has been taken out of you. Many don't know how to cope with this feeling, so they turn to drugs and alcohol. I know I went straight to partying my nights away, struggling through the day-to-day to keep a smile on my face. Then, when you think you've been through the worst of it, you find out that the dog that you've trained and raised can't stay with you anymore because of your living situation. You know it's the right thing, but it's too much to handle, so instead of coping in a healthy manner, you go to a party and drink your night away until you're blind and you wake up in the hospital the next morning. The mental strain from being homeless is the hardest part. And not many people know what it's like to lose something like a home. It's different from a death, but the feeling is true. Everyone in some way or another has lost a loved one, but not everyone has lost their home. One can try and help figure out what it's like to feel all these emotions. It's harder to grasp the concept, the emotions that come with it. Then, when you're finally old enough to go vote, you're turned away because you don't have an address.
Who am I and what is my story? I am Jay. I had an old name, but that person is gone now. The person I show you today is the true me. I'm a crazy, fun-loving, strong person. I had to grow up way too fast with people coming in and out of my life, but I figured how to make the best of it. Even if I didn't know where my next meal was coming from or if I'd have clean laundry, I did the things that I needed to do to solve those problems. I work hard, I help my family, I pay bills, and I'm a trans person of color. I'm an actor, a soldier. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I spent most of my life there. I'm the middle child of Lisa, a sibling, friend, cousin, an activist, comedian, a fun person, a kind person. I'm 20, and I'm taking it day by day.
Don't go out at night. Don't dress provocatively. Just carry pepper spray with you. Don't be such a bitch. Smile. Every woman in this country has heard these statements. Little girls are taught that they should never be alone with a man. Little girls are taught to never show too much skin. Little girls are taught that they should only speak when spoken to. Little girls are taught that boys will be boys, and if he hurts you, it just means he likes you. Women in this country are taught from a young age that it is our fault if we are assaulted. Women in this country are denied bodily autonomy to keep us from living our independent lives. Women in this country are paid lower wages so that we will continue to be dependent on men. Women in this country are scared. I know I am. But fear? Fear turns to anger, and with anger comes riots. And you best be damn sure we are not going to sit pretty and be silent anymore. So the next time you tell women to smile, Don't be surprised when we spit in your face.
The words of Susan B. Anthony. Men, their rights, and nothing more. Women, their rights, and nothing less. I declare to you that women must not depend upon the protection of man, but must be taught to protect themselves, and there I take my stand. No man is good enough to govern any woman without her consent.
As an actress, I get to tell other people's stories. Actors' jobs are to tell stories, to influence or inspire the audience. In some cases, to bring hidden truths to center stage. That's my favorite thing about theater. You never know who's sitting in the audience or whose heart you may be reaching out to. Even as a young actor, I have told many stories. I've told the story of a stepsister, a groupie, king, monster, wife, mother, maid, widow, meerkat, princess, nun, and so on. And I hope to tell the stories of many, many more. So I guess my story is theirs. My story is that I will always support the people around me, and that I will continue to share their stories both on stage and off to do what I can to help. I grew up Roman Catholic, but I'm not a Catholic who hates upon others or forces my beliefs down other people's throats. In the Catholic Church, we are told to love one another, to be kind, loving, and forgiving just as God is. But then some Catholics turn around and tell a woman she's going to hell because she loves another woman. In my mind, the only sin occurring is passing judgment and hate onto someone else. But then again, I don't fully agree with everything the church does. I also believe women should have a choice over their bodies. I just don't understand the hate in this world. What do you care? Why are people so concerned about what others are doing? If someone has a different belief or way of life than me, who am I to judge? Who am I to condemn them?
I am a person who has experienced many different things, but have not been a minority throughout my life. I felt the need to hide, but not based on what I'm born as, whether that has to do with gender, sexuality, or race. I want to learn from those who are born into discrimination and really hear their stories and experiences. The only way to get people to listen to my point of view is to understand and listen to their point of view. And that's it. Everyone's voice matters. The minute people start to question if their voice matters is when that freedom goes away.
I get really nervous to share my story and who I am. I always want to appear perfect and like I have everything in my life figured out. The funny thing is, for the most part, I do. I work really hard to never have bumps in the road and to have smooth and easy days. Unfortunately, though, no one is perfect, and I have faced many challenges in my life that make me not perfect. And I have a hard time accepting those things because I see them as weaknesses. I really struggle with my own mental illness. It has made so many days of my life difficult. I have horrible OCD and ADHD. I can't walk into a room without feeling everyone sees my insecurities. People poke fun of OCD and anxiety all the time, when in reality it has made my life much harder some days. I know mental illness may not be as severe or serious as some other issues, but I am a crazy human being, and I'm learning to accept it. I am a loud musical theater kid who loves to belt at the top of their lungs in the most inappropriate places. I love arts and crafts and cooking. But the thing I really do love the most, and it might sound cheesy, is I love being the version of myself who can give all my love to others. I adore showing others I love them. I am boy crazy and seem to convince myself I'm going to marry every boy I meet. But I love loving my friends and family. I'm just full of love, and that's me.
Immigration. By definition, immigration is the action of coming to live permanently in a foreign country. But in this country, people have a problem with people coming to this country, so then they are forced to come illegally. When they do, they are shamed and treated less of a human, more like an animal, and deported back to their country. Many people come to a new land looking for a better life and in search of a safer life. How does America promote these things? But when individuals from outside want some as well, they're denied. In my opinion, this country shouldn't even have a say in anything immigration related, because this country is built on stolen land. Don't come to me with the "we settled here." No, you stole. Killed were thousands of indigenous people already living here and settled here. History books need to start teaching it right and telling all the facts and stop whitewashing the education system. Then we need to talk about how we continue to evolve civilization for hundreds of years and have no representation of the true natives of this country. We also need to start fact-checking people and remind them that they are descendants of immigrants.
I am Joey, born in Concord, New Hampshire. I am gay, gender nonconforming, a performer that is constantly challenging themselves to be the best version of who they can be, a lover of music and how it influences me to move, an advocate and ally for all minority groups who are under attack due to unfair policies, loved. I was shaped by music, dance, the performing arts, and artistry that pushes the limits of binary gender. Love and encouragement to push on from loved ones around me. Stress and discouragement from loved and not so loved ones around me. Halloween and all things spooky. Self-hatred at times, but also the process of loving and learning to love different aspects of myself. Comedy and how it shaped the view of my world and myself. My own persistence to drive and succeed, even if I couldn't see the end result in my mind. I want to be a star who makes money, someone who evokes deeper thought in others, whether it be about art, government policies, themselves, or their perspectives of people and their existence. Successful and happy, though I never want to lose my drive to continually push myself to be greater. Loved deeply, and to love deeply.
The passion of Kimberly Jones in Atlanta. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. There's a social contract that we all have. That if you steal, or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own by our bootstraps in Tulsa and you dropped bombs on us. When we built in Rosewood, you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract. So fuck your Target. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground and it still wouldn't be enough. And they're lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
I'd like to believe that my voice matters. But looking at things more realistically, my voice as a bisexual African-American Caucasian woman is one of the lesser voices that has been heard. When my voice isn't listened to, and when it is listened to, it's for the convenience of those around me. My voice and feelings are always valid, and sometimes those around me need to experience hardships in order to understand it. In the end, I want my voice to matter and be heard. I don't want it to be a new trend. There's no true call to action if it's a new trend.
I want people to stop trying to change me or my life just because I'm different. I want everyone to be secure, stable, and happy. I want people to have food, homes, and love. I want to tell a story of truth. My story is complex, scary, beautiful. I'm the daughter of an immigrant and a Jew. I spend so much of my life scared. My story is grief and healing. I'm a student, an actor, artist, activist, friend, partner, daughter, pagan Jew, a communist in theory, protester, truth teller, open book, empath to a fault, trusting, and a healer. So how do I get people to listen? Never stop telling your story. Be pissed and sad. Let the people listen. Be honest. There are people who are in power who think they have better ideas than us. My freedom comes from the fact that I own my own mind. No human should be property. If you have a story, there is someone who will listen. Shout it from the rooftops.
In 1851, the abolitionist and former slave Sojourner Truth spoke before a feminist group. Twixt the Negroes in the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. Well, that man over there says women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. Ain't I a woman? Look at me, and look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it. And I bear the lash as well, and ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. When I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's it they call intellect? That's it, honey. Well, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman? Man had nothing to do with it. If the first woman God had ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they's asking to do it. The men better let them.
How can we expect a representative democracy for all types of people if the only people represented are those that have the most or give the least? We aren't representing the common folk anymore. We are representing those with the large economic sway. Saying this doesn't affect me, therefore I don't need to worry about it, insinuates selfishness, close-minded thinking, and a lack of consideration for others. Oftentimes, those who need the most support are those in the minority, or even one or two additional votes could change the game and its result. Vote for yourself. But more importantly, vote for others.
Does my voice matter? I think that my voice matters. It matters to me and the people I surround myself with that matter to most. But I know people who matter where it comes from. But where it comes from most.
When I went to vote for the first time, I was confused and overwhelmed by needing to choose a party. It would be so much easier if I could simply vote based on who I agree with and think is better fit to be the leader of this country, rather than assigning myself to one party's ideas or beliefs. To me, the division between Democrats and Republicans is what divides this country the most. When I did vote for our current president, I felt the power of making a difference more than I expected to. When I realized my voice had helped the former president be removed from office, I finally understood the importance of being an American and having my political voice heard.
The land of the free, with over 2.3 million behind bars. Minorities, most minorities, enslaved in prisons by a corrupt and racist system. Our country is poison, feeding on the oppression of minorities. And the only antidote for this crippling venom is to give up your culture and adhere to a white standard. Walls divide. They don't protect or shelter people, they just divide. What is wrong with people? Children are literally being kept in cages from their parents. Families are being torn apart, and you call it a policy. They aren't detention centers. They're cages.
Freedom is not a state. It is an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society. John Lewis.
You know, I think being asked a direct question is always going to trip us up. Many of us have probably gone through our everyday lives without ever being asked, what do you really think? There's a barrier in our mind that keeps us from telling the truth, but why? You know what? I want freedom to be something we have without living in the fear of others' freedom.
The first time I voted, I was at school, but I'm from Massachusetts. Yet I had no issue voting here. There were a lot of protesters outside the elementary school where the voting took place that harassed people, but overall, it was a good experience. I never go alone since I'm a woman of color living in New Hampshire. As for the recent election, I remember my father texting me saying to go to the grocery store prior to the election results and to stay inside the best I could in fear of something that may happen to me. He called me, checking in that I was safe and inside after the election results. Why should I vote? Why is it important to me? It's a place for your say. It's important to me so I can contribute to the change. As a Black woman, I especially should, given the timeline, since I would not have the right to vote without the decades of fighting for not just women voting, but Black women voting. It would be a shame for me to ignore voting after all of that. It's fine that someone wants to exercise their right not to vote, but for me, the fight for my right to vote was too big for me not to.
Growth only comes from discomfort. You cannot avoid something that makes you uncomfortable.
Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes to hear and see the truth, we have to make people uncomfortable. I want to find and speak truth because there is so much false information.
How do I approach my own freedoms? By doing them. By actively being a proud Jewish woman. By not letting my voice be silenced by those who don't want to listen. I refuse to be ignored. I will also build voices of others who the world wants to silence. I will be there as a shoulder to cry on, an ear to listen, and a voice to be heard. Having the right to vote is the bare minimum when it comes to rights. You vote because you then have a say in who represents you. It's your civic duty. Voting gives me the opportunity to fight back.
Could any amount of words truly describe a person and the impact they have on others? How do we define them? By the beliefs they held, what they achieved, what they wanted to accomplish, by the people they loved? What I enjoy about theater as a whole is that there is no one right way to answer them other than truthfully. By having the space to speak my truth and my story, as well as learning from others, by hearing their experiences in their worldview, I now have more of an opportunity to assess what I prioritize in life and educate myself on how to be a better citizen and human being.
Who owns my body? My mom? My peers? The government? No. I own my body because no one else besides me lives in my body. My beautiful brown skin and curly hair. I own my body.
Sometimes you have to just sit and listen to all the noise that happens. Good things can come from chaotic noise.
The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for preservation of injustice, or will we be extremists for the cause of justice? Martin Luther King Jr., in a letter from Birmingham jail.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "Look at the preamble to our Constitution. The preamble says, 'We the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union.' Who are the people in the beginning? White property-owning men. Who are we the people today? The United States in all its diversity. The genius of this document that was written toward the end of the 18th century and has governed us for well over 200 years is ever becoming more perfect and is ever becoming more inclusive."
I have a dream. Martin Luther King Jr. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militance which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back.
From Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us.
We stand with Martin Luther King Jr. I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear.